Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series, Essays on the Gita, with our beloved Ranga. We are in the second chapter, The Divine Teacher, on page 13, the sentence beginning with, India has from ancient times. Will you give us some background? Good.
So we will read each sentence and see if it's clear and proceed with it. India has from ancient times held strongly a belief in the reality of the avatar, the descent into form, the revelation of the Godhead in humanity. So, India has from ancient times held strongly a belief in the reality of the avatar. The avatar is not a concept, but it's a reality. Avatar is from the Sanskrit root avatri. To ava means to come down and tri means to cross. So it is coming down into the physical world. So it's a descent of the divine into the physical world. And Sri Aurobindo used the word form to always mean the material forms. So a descent of the formless divine into the form. And the form is that of a human being. The revelation of Godhead in humanity. Okay? Note very clearly that the avatar concept applies only to humanity. The divine presence is there in the animal also, but that's not an avatar. The divine presence is there everywhere, even in a stone. But that's not the avatar. The avatar is, he will tell you later on, when the human being, the human part of the descent, realizes that he is the supreme. You may identify yourself with your own individual self. That's a spiritual, a yogi identifies himself with his spiritual self. That's not the avatar. That's an individual realization. But when this individual knows himself to be not his individual self alone, but the supreme self, that is the avatar.
Then are the 10 avatars a misnomer?
There the meaning is slightly different. It means that this is a stage of evolution. So the divine is descending and making himself available in matter, but it is veiled. There the definition of avatar will vary. So when it is in humanity, because when he is descending into the kurma, the tortoise or the boar, okay, he is not the humanity. So the Sri Aurobindo is very clear, okay? The avatar, the descent of the Godhead in humanity. That's the avatar, speaking specifically. So, in fact, I had a recording of mother when she's saying, now I know who I really am. And Sri Aurobindo also has told me that. So she knows that she is the supreme divine mother. So obviously, she is defining herself as an avatar. So that's the avatar. Not you and me realizing that I am my soul. That's not avatar. It's the supreme universal soul. The supreme oversoul, if you want. You realize that you are coming from there and the divine himself has descended into you. That's the avatar.
So the avatar in the stages of evolution is
veiled.
Vague.
Yeah.
It's a vague term.
Huh?
A vague term, avatar?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Not specific to what Sri Aurobindo is saying.
There is a divine descent, but not into humanity. It's into an animal form, into a vital man, into a mental man. It goes on like that. Okay, so in the West, this belief has never really stamped itself upon the mind because it has been presented through exoteric Christianity as a theological dogma without any roots in the reason and general consciousness and attitude towards life. Now, interesting, note the word exoteric Christianity. There is also an esoteric Christianity where there is real spiritual experience. because they do speak of the transcendent, the cosmic, and the individual.
This is
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
This is exoteric.
Yeah. No, exoteric is external.
No.
Esoteric is the internal.
Yes.
So when Shivda is saying, exoteric Christianity did not recognize the avatar. But maybe esoteric did realize when they speak of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Maybe they did realize.
And when they, in 500 AD, they denied reincarnation.
That's right. It shifted from Rome to Istanbul. The center for the Christian thing went away from Rome and it shifted to Turkey. At that time it was called Constantinople.
Yes.
Yeah. But that is modern day Istanbul, the capital of Turkey. But they are going back to their Mohammedan roots in the beginning, but it was mainly Christian. Okay, so in the West, this belief has never really stamped itself upon the mind. Now note the construction of the sentence suggests that it may have been there, the concept of the avatar, but not stamped upon in a very clear manner. Okay, so mind, because it is presented through exoteric Christianity as a theological dogma without any roots in the reason and general consciousness and attitude towards life. In fact, the exoteric Christianity believes that the human being can never become the divine. That's very clear. He can have a relation with the divine, but never become the idea of man is born a sinner is very, very strongly put into Christianity. So, a man can't be the divine. But in India, it has grown up and persisted as a logical outcome of the Vedantic view of life. Note interestingly how he is saying that in the West, there is no root in reason. But in India, because you are starting from the Advaita philosophy, it is logical. There it is irrational to think that the human being can be divine. But here it is logical because the Advaita philosophy. And what's the Advaita philosophy? There is only one divine. Nothing else exists except the divine. So even the lowest what you are seeing is really the divine. So naturally it's a logical conclusion. Okay, so a view of life and taken firm root in the consciousness of the race. All existence is a manifestation of God because He is the only existence. There you are. And nothing can be except as either a real figuring or else a figment of that one reality. It's a slightly interesting sidelight is in India, everything is holy because the divine is there everywhere. And that's why there's also an abnormal respect for anybody with a slightly higher level of consciousness or even a higher level of natural capacities. Okay, that's why this idea of a guru and the idea of, giving respect to others, okay, that is very much there, which is not there in the West. The West is more individualistic. They can even challenge the president, they can even challenge the priest. But here in India, it's not like that. It's the other way. Too much. You go overboard sometimes in India. when we give undue respect to people who don't deserve the respect. So it's an offshoot of this. I think that the divine is there everywhere. Okay, so I go on. All existence is a manifestation of God because He is the only existence. This is the definition of Advaita Vedanta. And nothing can be except as either a real figuring or else a figment of that one reality. Therefore, every conscious being is in part or in some way a descent of the infinite into the apparent finiteness of name and form. Name and form is the physical world, and a name is not the essential part of you. I can call you Narad, but I can call you also Richard. but makes no difference to your essential being. So name all the forms that you see in the physical world only nama, name and form. The form can also change. In fact, the form is changing all the time. You were a small baby of 7 pounds and now you are maybe 70, 80 pounds or maybe more. Okay. Kilos. So that form is changing and the name also can change, but the essence does not change. So
when we were very young, we would chant this saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me."
Names will never?
Names will never hurt me.
Oh, that's right.
So you can call me any name.
Yeah, that's right. They're essentially the same thing. Okay. A descent of infinite into the, So, therefore, every conscious being is in part or in some way a descent of the infinite into the apparent finiteness of name and form. There you are. The finiteness that you see is only apparent. Behind the form is the formless presence. That's what he's saying. But it's a veiled manifestation. The divine is veiled by the 3 layers of the body, the vital and the mind. They are the sheaths, as he calls them elsewhere. Annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha. Or if you want, the physical sheath, the vital sheath and the mental sheath. So it's a veiled manifestation. And there is a gradation between the supreme being, of the divine and the consciousness shrouded partly or wholly by ignorance of self in the finite. There is a footnote there for supreme being, Parabhava. Parabhava or Parabhava, that is the highest existence. Supreme being of the divine. And the consciousness down below, shrouded partly or wholly by ignorance of self in the finite. Now, the use of the word shroud is very interesting, because the shroud is a piece of cloth that you cover a dead body with. So, the physical, although it's not dead, but so far as the soul is concerned of the divine presence, it's a shroud. It is covering you. So,
and it's usually a heavy cloth.
Yes, that's right. So partly or wholly by ignorance of self in the finite. The conscious embodied soul, there's again he is referring back to the Gita all the time. Dehi. Dehi is one who has a body. So the soul has a body. So he is referred to as the Dehi. So and the conscious embodied soul is the spark of the divine fire, and that soul in man opens out to self-knowledge as it develops out of ignorance of self into self-being. The normal man has the potential to become divine. That which is in essence potential can become also dynamic, and you can realize that you are not the body, mind, life, you are the self. You are the Atman, you are the Brahman, the individual, not the sovereign. The divine also, pouring itself into the forms of the cosmic existence, is revealed ordinarily in an efflorescence of its powers. That's a vibhuti. He'll tell you later on. So, when you see extraordinary powers in somebody, it's in the outer nature, but still, it's a divine inside which is showing its presence there by extraordinary powers in the outer nature. So efflorescence of its powers. In energies and magnitudes of its knowledge, love, joy, developed force of being. And the footnote says vibhuti. A vibhuti is a human being, but with a specific power which has been endowed by the divine to that particular person to achieve a certain work in the physical world. So, Vivekananda is a vibhuti. Sri Aurobindo even calls Napoleon a vibhuti. Okay? They have a specific work to perform, and their capacity of performance is far superior to the ordinary man. But they are not the avatar. They are midway point between man and the avatar. That's a vibhuti. I don't know if he has given any other examples of vibhutis. Chaitanya was a partial avatar, because sometimes he used to behave like a devotee. And if you are behaving like a devotee, you are obviously human. But sometimes he used to behave like the Lord. He used to get the power, and if people came to him, he would grant boons, he would bless them. A devotee is not going to bless very easily someone because they realize their own limitation. So, Chaitanya was a partial avatar. But Ramakrishna, Sri Aurobindo has not spoken specifically, but he has called him a remarkable case. Okay. But he himself has said, Jai Ram, Jai Krishna, Shai Ramakrishna. In other words, the one who was Ram and the one who was Krishna, that itself is the same as the Ramakrishna. So he has declared himself to be an avatar. So Aurobindo is not specifically that he is an avatar, at least I am not aware of it.
And Ramana Maharshi?
Ramana Maharshi is not an avatar. He himself also did not, because his whole purpose was to go to the self. So I don't think he was declared as an avatar by Sri Aurobindo.
But in vibhutis, we believe Lincoln in America was a vibhuti.
Probably George Washington.
And George Washington
Yeah?
also, yes.
And who else did you say?
Lincoln.
Yeah. He had a specific work. And he was a wonderful character. We have brought out a series of articles on him in Mother India. Abraham Lincoln. Extraordinary man. Extraordinary. There is no doubt about it. His pursuit of truth, his pursuit of simplicity, his wit, and the advice that he gave to the teacher of his son. It's fantastic. You should read that. You go to the internet and type, okay, Lincoln's advice to the teacher of his son. You will see how magnificently he writes. It's really beautiful. It's worth looking at that.
Okay.
What he wants his teacher to teach his son. Wonderful. But it's a veiled manifestation, and there's a gradation between the supreme being of the divine and the consciousness shrouded partly or wholly by ignorance of self in the finite. The conscious embodied soul is a spark of the divine fire, and that soul in man opens out to self-knowledge as it develops out of ignorance of self into self-being. This is a normal yogi. The divine also, pouring himself into the forms of the cosmic existence, is revealed ordinarily in an efflorescence of its powers, in energies and magnitudes of its knowledge. It could be knowledge or love or joy, developed force of being in degrees and phases of the divinity. So that's a vibhuti. But when the divine consciousness and power, taking upon itself the human form and the human mode of action, possesses it not only by powers and magnitudes, by degrees and outward phases of itself, but out of its eternal self-knowledge. Now it is eternal self-knowledge. When the unborn knows itself and acts in the frame of the mental being and the appearance of birth, that is the height of the conditioned manifestation. The conditioned manifestation is the body, mind and life. It's a manifestation, but conditioned manifestation. And the highest that conditioned manifestation can reach is to know itself as the Supreme Divine. That's the avatar. Very clear. He's saying the unborn knows itself and acts in the frame of the mental being. The unborn is the Supreme Divine. But he is born into a body, mind, life, okay? Which is a conditioned manifestation.
So, as we are now, is it even possible to call someone like Tesla a vibhuti?
No, I
Not
don't
way,
think
huh?
He-
So
the-
intelligence and knowledge is not a criteria.
That's right. There's a difference between Paraprakriti and Aparaprakriti and Parashakti and Aparashakti. The knowledge in the physical world is not a spiritual knowledge. So Tesla is an extraordinary person so far as his power in the physical world is concerned. But he's an ordinary man with extraordinary powers. But not, he doesn't have a spiritual function. Creating what he is doing, okay, the electric car and the super fast transportation, he has got all ideas like that. That's only in the physical world. It's not a spiritual power. It's physical power, physical and mental power. There's no doubt that he's extraordinary. But you can't call him a vibhuti. Okay. So that completes the paragraph where he is defining what the avatar is. The avatar is half man, half divine. The yogi, you could say, is man realizing himself slowly as the individual divine in the human body, mind, life. The individual. But when the yogi realizes himself as I am the supreme, like Mother is declaring, okay, that's the avatar. You are fully conscious of a union with the supreme. So that's the avatar. The Vaishnava form of Vedantism, which has laid most stress upon this conception, expresses the relation of God in man to man in God by the double figure of Nara Narayana, associated historically with the origin of a religious school very similar in its doctrines to the teaching of the Gita. He is explaining, because in the Gita you have Arjuna, who is a human being, and in that same chariot there is the divine himself who is standing there. So this is the reality of a human being. The chariot is your body and you are human. The human soul is there, but there is also the divine potentiality in you. Okay, so that's the Gita's. So now Srimad is going to give you another one. Okay, Nara is the human soul, which, eternal companion of the divine, finds itself only when it awakens to that companionship and begins, as the Gita would say, to live in God. Narayana is the divine soul, always present in our humanity, the secret guide, friend, and helper of the human being, the Lord who abides within the heart of creatures. Okay, on chapter 18, verse 61 of the Gita. When within us the veil of that secret sanctuary is withdrawn and man speaks face to face with God, hears the divine voice, receives the divine light, and acts in the divine power, then becomes possible the supreme uplifting of the embodied human conscious being into the unborn and eternal. He becomes capable of that dwelling in God and giving up of his whole consciousness into the divine, which the Gita upholds as the best or highest secret of things. Uttamam Rahasyam. When this eternal divine consciousness, always present in every human being, this God in man takes possession partly or wholly of the human consciousness and becomes visible human shape, becomes invisible human shape, the guide, the teacher, the leader of the world, not as those who, living in their humanity, yet feel something of the power or light or love of the divine gnosis, informing and conducting them, but out of that divine gnosis itself, direct from its central force and plenitude. Then we have the manifest avatar. The inner divinity is the eternal avatar in man. The inner divinity is the eternal avatar in man. The human manifestation is its sign and development in the external world. So, in other words, that last sentence means everybody is a potential avatar. When you realize your divine, your individual soul, you are halfway to the mark. And then when you realize that you are the universal oversoul, then you become the avatar. But usually, it's not always like that. A yogi, when he realizes that he is the individual soul and not the body-mind life, he has a choice of disappearing into the infinite. So he doesn't want to come back into the physical world. The possibility of an avatar is only when he comes back into the physical world. He may not. He may disappear into the infinite. Like the Buddhists, not Buddha, Buddhists too. So that's the difference between the avatar and the language is very, very clear. We'll have a look at it. Okay, so and there's a footnote, partly or wholly, and that's what we were discussing. Chaitanya, the avatar of Nadia, okay, is said to have been partly or occasionally occupied by the divine consciousness and power. There used to be a time when his actions were those of the divine himself. He would bless people and even grant boons. So all that was there. Even Ramakrishna also used to grant boons silently. Okay, but there it is slightly different. He is identifying himself with the Supreme, and if someone asks him for something, he will not take the decision himself as an individual divine soul. He will refer it back to the divine, and if it is possible, it gets done automatically. There is a very interesting case in his life where a couple came to him. They were a childless couple. They were married for 30 years or so, and they had no children. But when they came and asked him that we would like your blessings to have a child, they got a child in the next year. But that was, you can say that he granted it to them, but he is identifying himself with the Supreme because he was very, very clear that he is in the Brahman consciousness. He used to always say that the body-mind life is nothing but the Brahman consciousness. So he is letting the divine act through him. The Vaishnava form of Vedantism, which has laid most stress upon this conception, expresses the relation of God in man to man in God. Okay, the relation of God to man and man to God. Okay, by the double figure of Narad, associated historically with the origin of a religious school, very similar in its doctrines to the teaching of the Gita. So, I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to, but there is a story of, in the Vedas, I think, it's the Kutsa is a human being, in the Vedas it is there, and he is riding in a chariot with Indra, who is the divine mind. And by the time they come to the end of their journey, Kutsa, the human being, has put on the nature of Indra, and no one can see the difference between them. Except Indra's wife, because she is pure and she can see the similarity and yet she can distinguish between them. So that's the story that probably Srimad is referring to. The Vaishnava form of Vedantism is the avatar of Vishnu, and the avatar of Vishnu is Sri Krishna. So, express the relation of God in man to man in God by the double figure of Narad, associated historically with the origin of a religious school very similar in doctrines to the teaching of the Gita. Srimad is not referring to exactly what that religious school was, but we'll have to find out. Probably he is referring to that story of Kutsa and Indra. Nara is a human soul which, eternal companion of the divine, finds itself only when it awakens to that companionship and begins, as the Gita would say, to live in God. Narayana is the divine soul. By the way, Gita says to live in God. And Sri Aurobindo explains very clearly, the normal man lives in the ego. But the yogi who has realized his individual soul is living in God. So that's why he is making a difference between the two. Narayana is the divine soul, always present in our humanity, the secret guide, friend, and helper of the human being. The Lord who abides within the heart of creatures. This is in the last chapter, verse 61. Okay. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriddeshe tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantrarudhani mayaya. This is the phrase that he is referring to, that the divine is there seated in the heart of all creatures, making him spin, revolve round and round like a machine in the body-mind life. So that's the body-mind life is the outer, it's a machine. We know that because it works mechanically. And when your soul is trapped inside, you are a prisoner of the body-mind life. But he is there inside the... Now, a question arises whether this Ishvara that he is referring to is a psychic being or not. But I may not be, because the individual soul is the individual jiva. But Ishvara is the supreme. So there is the psychic being in man, but there is also the divine presence in man. So whether the two are same or there is a difference is very difficult to say. In fact, these are all mental ideas and they may not be contradictory. That's another thing we have to realize. Okay? So I go to the next one.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why did Aurobindo Basu constantly say Narayana, Narayana, Narayana?
He's taking God's name.
Was it it was an invocation to God?
Yes. In fact, there is when I got interested in Sanskrit, he was not really my teacher, but he took interest in me and he came and gave me Vishnu Sahasranama, the 1,000 names of Vishnu. So that's what they do. They go on reciting the name, repeat. In fact, there is a whole yoga, okay? Nama Japa, okay? The recitation of the divine's name, okay? So you can use any. But this Vishnu Sahasranama is 1,000 names of God. When you do that, automatically your thoughts are going towards the divine. Slowly, from a mechanical repetition, it becomes a conscious repetition. Just like the mantra. The mantra also, in the beginning, it may be mechanical words. But slowly, the vibration, the true vibrations of that mantra goes and awakens you to the meaning of that mantra. And Sri Aurobindo has got a very interesting passage in Savitri about the mantra. He says that when it is repeated mechanically, orally, a time comes when there is an automatic repetition, not orally, but it runs in the blood. It becomes automatic. The whole being is participating in that mantra. So the mantra is a very powerful method. Okay.
So when Mother gave a mantra for Sri Aurobindo,
yes, that's right.
Sharanam Mama.
Yeah, that's right.
Is it greater than the other mantras?
That she was using herself because she was told to do that by Nilakanta Shastri, who was the priest from Rameshwaram. He said, you do that. The question arises, why did she do that? She is the divine herself.
Yes.
You have to understand that when she is doing that, she is doing it for the body transformation. She is doing it not at a spiritual level. She is doing it absolutely at the physical level, not only at the physical level, but at the cellular level. How does Mother, who is an avatar, start reciting a mantra? It makes no sense normally. But you have to understand it this way, that she was acting not at the mental level, not at the spiritual level, not at the vital level. She is acting performing the deed of bringing the divine down into the very cell of a body. We have to understand it that way. Vibrations of a mantra have power. But the Guru decides which sounds are most suitable for the disciple. And that's why it can go on changing. Every mantra may not fit everybody. Those vibrations which are most conducive to your change is given to you by the Guru. And that's usually whispered into your ear. You are not to tell that to anybody else. Because its power would be depleted and reduced. Its purity has to be maintained. And Sri Aurobindo was not very particular about the mantra because he says, I am there and I am giving you my influence. You don't need. But when someone insisted, that was a gentleman called Yogananda. Okay? So he gave, the mantra. Om Anandamayi Chaitanyamayi Satyamayi Parame. That he gave to him. But then later on, he gave many other mantras also when he was asked for. Okay? And some of them are very interesting. His own name. He incorporated his own name. Om Tat Sat Jyotir Aravinda. That was another mantra that he gave. All these mantras are there in the Record of Yoga volume given towards the end of the book. Several mantras are there in his own handwriting. The Lord who abides in the heart of all creatures, as we were discussing, as I told you, I am not 100% sure, but there is a psychic being in man which is a representative of the self. But it is, in a sense, limited. It's a divine consciousness which is in darkness. But the Supreme Divine Himself is also there. The Supreme Divine Presence is there in everything. So that may be slightly different from the psychic being.
And when the psychic being comes to the front?
Yeah. Then it is beginning to realize what it is, the individual self. There again is the individual self, not the Supreme Self. Okay, so. And when within us the veil of that secret sanctuary is withdrawn, the man speaks face to face with God, hears the divine voice, receives the divine light, acts in the divine power, then becomes possible the supreme uplifting of the embodied human conscious being into the unborn and eternal. Let's have a very close look at this sentence, because he is defining himself as the avatar in this sentence. Just see carefully. When within us the veil of that secret sanctuary is withdrawn and man speaks face to face with God. Okay? Now, when man speaks face to face with God, that's what happened with Ramakrishna. He is constantly referring to that image in the temple and he is speaking to her and she is giving a reply to him all the time. He used to get guidance from her. He used to have sometimes doubt because his intellect was not so highly developed. He was illiterate, almost illiterate. He could write his name in Bengali. So he is asking the mother all sorts of questions. Such and such a person is saying this. What do you say, mother? Is it real? He used to ask things like that. And she would reply to him. One way, very interesting incident is there, okay, in which one person is challenging Ramakrishna and saying, you are saying that the divine can do everything, but can he make the hibiscus plant which gives white hibiscuses, can the divine make it red? He asks him. Okay? And then he goes and asks that to the Divine Mother, and the next day that plant which is giving white suddenly sprouts a red one. And what is interesting is that we had a building in the press, okay, and we had a hibiscus plant there with white flowers. After I heard this story, I see that a red hibiscus has come on that plant. You as interested, you should know that this is possible.
Oh yes,
it does happen.
I've seen it many times.
So this is a very interesting incident. So he used to ask questions. So Sri Aurobindo is saying that, he's saying very clearly, man speaks face to face with God. But Ramakrishna's experience at that time was only the personal divine, but not the impersonal divine. So that came later on in his life. Hears the divine voice. What about Sri Aurobindo? He is hearing the divine voice. Go to Chandranagar. Go to Pondicherry. And he says, I could recognize that voice. Sri Krishna's voice speaking to him. And in jail, constant guidance. Okay. Receives the divine light, acts in the divine power. Then becomes possible the supreme uplifting of the embodied human conscious being into the unborn and eternal. He becomes capable of that dwelling in God and giving up of his whole consciousness into the divine, which the Gita upholds as the best or highest secret of things. Uttamam Rahasyam. When this eternal divine consciousness, always present in every human being, this God in man, takes possession partly or wholly of the human consciousness, then becomes in visible human shape the guide, the teacher, the leader of the world, not as those who, living in their humanity, yet feel something of the power or light or love of the divine gnosis, informing and conducting them, but out of that divine gnosis itself, direct from its central force and plenitude, then we have the manifest avatar. The passage is very, very clear. A yogi realizing his individual self is not the avatar. He could be a vibhuti, but not an avatar. An avatar is when you realize that you are coming straight from the Supreme. He is using the word divine gnosis. The word gnosis is, he refers to it as a supramental. Sri Aurobindo doesn't like the word supramental much because it could be misinterpreted. So he says the divine gnosis, the supramental word. When you know that yes, that is what is expressing itself through me, and we have the very clear evidence of Sri Krishna descending into Sri Aurobindo. So what could be more of an avatar than that? Sri Krishna himself descended into his body.
Could I ask, what would be the unmanifest avatar?
The Supreme Divine.
Yeah. Not come down into a human form. We have the manifest avatar.
Okay. The unmanifest, then he is not avatar. He has not descended.
Okay.
So he is on top.
Does not come down, yes.
Okay. So, the inner divinity is the eternal avatar in man. The human manifestation is a sign and development in the external world. So, it means that the divine is always present in you, and you can develop into an avatar. So, every human being is a future avatar. Possible, but you need not choose to be. First, you have to become the individual soul, and then you can become the universal soul if that's your destiny. It wasn't the destiny of Raman Maharshi. He says that very clearly. Because there is a very interesting incident where someone went to Raman Maharshi and told him, Sri Aurobindo is speaking of the ascent and the descent. And what do you say? So Raman Maharshi said, I don't understand what is ascent and descent because the divine is there everywhere in the universe. So where is the question of descent? Okay. So when this was reported back to Sri Aurobindo, they asked him, you said that he lives in the truth consciousness. But this is what he is saying. So Sri Aurobindo answered, I told you that he lives in the truth consciousness. But did I say that he lives in the highest truth consciousness? So that's the spiritual planes of consciousness, level 2. But Sri Aurobindo is speaking of level 3, the supermind. And when this was referred back to Raman Maharshi, he said that I have no commitment to go beyond what I have achieved. So this is also another very interesting thing. Each soul is given a specific work to do in the physical world. And the work that he had to do was to go up to the spiritual planes of consciousness and guide the others in the physical world. But to go to the supramental was not his function. He says that himself. He says there is no sankalpa in me. There is no decision or something to go beyond what I have done. That was not his spiritual destiny. But he was in the truth consciousness. There is no doubt about that. And he was a great soul. Mother admitted that when he passed away. If you remember the famous incident in April 1950. He passed away in April 1950. And Sri Aurobindo passed away in December 1950. So when he passed away, it was at night. It was around 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. And there was that huge shooting star went like that through the heavens for such a long time. And mother was in the playground and she looked up and said, a great soul has passed away. And then the next day, all the newspapers were flashing the news that Ramana Maharshi leaves his body.
Sri Aurobindo called him a spiritual Hercules.
Who? Ramana Maharshi or Ramakrishna?
Ramana Maharshi.
I don't remember that, but obviously he was a Hercules. Because he chose the path of Jnana Yoga with his own effort. Okay? The question of surrender and all that may have come later on, but not in the beginning. When he was a 16-year-old boy, he went, gave up everything. He threw away all his clothes and money and everything and was sitting in the temple there in Tiruvannamalai. There is a temple and there is even a place where he used to sit. We have gone and seen that place also. And he used to meditate day and night, day and night. Insects are biting him. Wounds are developing on his body. No consciousness at all. When after a couple of days or hours, when he feels the need for food, he goes out. Barefooted, only with a loincloth, nothing. And he used to beg for food. And when people gave him either gruel or whatever it was, a little rice, he used to just eat with his hands. So someone asked him afterwards, after he realized and he became a well-known guru all over the world, someone asked him that, didn't you feel ashamed in modern times that you are like a beggar, you are going out into the streets and begging and you are taking in your hands and eating? What did you feel? You didn't feel ashamed of yourself? He says, far from it. I am the emperor of the world. There is a sense of majesty. There is no question of shame or anything. It's a magnificent story. When we thus understand the conception of avatarhood, we see that whether for the fundamental teaching of the Gita, our present subject, or for spiritual life generally, the external aspect has only a secondary importance. Such controversies as the one that has raged in Europe over the historicity of Christ would seem to a spiritually minded Indian largely a waste of time. He would concede to it a considerable historical but hardly any religious importance. For what does it matter in the end whether a Jesus, son of the carpenter Joseph, was actually born in Nazareth or Bethlehem, lived and taught and was done to death on a real or trumped up charge of sedition, so long as we can know by spiritual experience the inner Christ, live uplifted in the light of his teaching, and escape from the yoke of the natural law by that atonement of man with God, of which the crucifixion is a symbol. If the Christ, God made man, lives within our spiritual being, it would seem to matter little whether or not the Son of Mary physically lived and suffered and died in Judea. So too, the Krishna who matters to us is the eternal incarnation of the divine and not the historical teacher and leader of men. Beautiful. So, we can redo this next time.
Okay.
when we thus understand the conception of avatarhood.
Namaste.